You have been told that strength means not feeling pain. The Stoics said the opposite, and built an entire practice around it. And yet Aristotle went even further. He argued, with great precision, that the person who feels no fear at all is not courageous but deficient, lacking something essential to the human capacity for right action. That claim, made in the Nicomachean Ethics around 350 BC, is not a motivational paradox. It is a philosophical argument with serious implications for how you understand yourself and the choices you face. This matters today because we live in a culture that treats fear as a malfunction, something to be eliminated, medicated, or overridden by willpower. Aristotle would say that diagnosis is precisely backwards, and that misunderstanding it is why so many people either collapse under fear or mistake numbness for mastery. In this video, we will examine Aristotle's account of courage in the Nicomachean Ethics, what he meant by it, why fear is not its enemy, and what the practical implications are for anyone who wants to act well under pressure. Before we go further, if this kind of philosophy interests you, subscribe. We publish new videos every week on ideas that actually change how you think. Aristotle composed the Nicomachean Ethics as a sustained inquiry into the question of how a human being ought to live. Book 3, chapters 6 through 9, contains his treatment of courage, Andreia in Greek, and what he wrote there has no real equivalent in modern psychological literature. He begins not with a definition of bravery but with a definition of what is genuinely fearful, and that starting point changes everything that follows. Aristotle opens his account of courage in the Nicomachean Ethics by making a distinction that most readers miss entirely. He does not begin by asking what courage feels like or how to acquire it. He begins by asking what kinds of things are genuinely worth fearing, because without a correct answer to that question, no account of courage can be coherent. Fear, in his framework, is not an irrational interruption of clear thinking. It is a response to perceived danger, and a response can be more or less accurate depending on whether the danger is real, how serious it is, and whether there is anything worth risking for it. The specific danger Aristotle treats as the proper object of courage is death, and not death in general, but what he calls the finest death, death in battle, or more broadly, death faced in the service of something noble. This is not because other dangers are trivial, but because death represents the limit of all human goods. If a person can respond rightly to that ultimate threat, it reveals something about the quality of their character that lesser tests cannot, which is why Aristotle uses it as the defining case for the virtue. What this reveals is that Aristotle's conception of courage is not primarily about the management of emotion. It is about the relationship between a person's perception of danger, their assessment of what is worth doing, and the action they choose in response to both. Courage, as he defines it in Nicomachean Ethics 11:15a, is a mean with respect to fear and confidence, feeling the right amount of fear, in the right circumstances, toward the right objects, for the right reasons. That definition is deceptively demanding, because each of those qualifications does real philosophical work. The person who fears nothing does not occupy this mean. They fall below it, into what Aristotle calls a kind of insensibility, a failure to register genuine threat that is not strength but a distortion of reality. The courageous person feels fear because they see truly. And yet what the courageous person adds to that accurate perception is the capacity to act rightly in spite of it, which raises an immediate and harder question: what determines whether the action is right at all? Aristotle's account of virtue operates through the doctrine of the mean, introduced in Nicomachean Ethics 11:06b, which holds that every virtue is defined by its position between two corresponding vices, one of excess and one of deficiency. For courage, the vice of excess is rashness, and the vice of deficiency is cowardice. Both are failures of character, and both distort the relationship between fear and action, though they do so in opposite directions. Understanding each of them precisely is necessary before the nature of courage itself becomes clear. Cowardice is the more familiar failure. It consists in fearing too much, or, more accurately, in allowing fear to determine action when it should not. The coward perceives danger, allows fear to expand beyond its proportionate scope, and either withdraws when action was called for or acts in a way that abandons what genuinely mattered. Aristotle notes in Nicomachean Ethics 11:15b that the coward is pained by fear itself, by the anticipation of loss, rather than by the failure to act well, and that distinction is crucial, because it reveals that cowardice is ultimately a misplacement of what one cares about most. Rashness, however, is the failure that modern culture is least prepared to recognize as a failure at all. The rash person charges into danger without adequate fear, not because they have overcome their fear through long practice and clear reasoning, but because they have never genuinely registered the danger. They are, in Aristotle's language, deficient in the perception of what is truly fearful, and this deficiency is not a form of strength. It is a form of ignorance, because the world contains real dangers and a person who does not see them accurately will not act in proportion to what the situation actually demands. What this means in practice is that the person who prides themselves on feeling nothing, on never hesitating, never doubting, never being affected by what is at stake, is not exhibiting courage by Aristotle's account. They are exhibiting a vice. The courageous person, by contrast, feels fear accurately and resists it through something more than mere insensitivity. But this raises a harder question: what exactly is the force that allows a courageous person to feel fear and still act? And where does that force come from? Aristotle's answer to that question is one of the most important and least quoted passages in the entire Nicomachean Ethics. In Book 3, Chapter 7, he writes that the courageous person acts for the sake of the noble, to kalon in Greek, and that this is the defining mark that separates genuine courage from its various impostors. The noble, in Aristotle's moral vocabulary, refers not to social status but to what is genuinely fine, excellent, and worthy of pursuit for its own sake. To act for the sake of the noble means to act because the action is the right one, not because of external compulsion, social pressure, fear of shame, or the expectation of reward. This distinction is what allows Aristotle to identify several forms of behavior that resemble courage but are not the real thing. He enumerates them with care: citizen courage, which is driven by shame and the desire to avoid social disgrace; the courage of experience, which is merely the familiarity that reduces perceived risk without genuine virtue; the courage of spirit, which is the force of anger carrying a person forward without rational deliberation; optimistic courage, driven by past success rather than a real assessment of the present danger; and the courage of ignorance, which is simply not knowing what one faces. Each of these can produce brave-looking behavior, but none of them constitutes the virtue, because none of them is grounded in the correct relationship between perception, reason, and the choice of what is genuinely worth pursuing. The practical implication is significant. Aristotle is saying that the same outward action, standing firm in a dangerous situation, can be virtuous or not depending entirely on the internal structure that produces it. Two soldiers may hold the same position under the same fire, but if one does so because they fear the shame of retreat and the other does so because they have judged that holding is genuinely the right and noble thing to do, only the second is displaying courage as a virtue. The external observer cannot always distinguish them. The agent, however, can, and that internal distinction is what Aristotle's moral psychology is ultimately concerned with. This is also why courage cannot be reduced to a technique or a discipline of desensitization. It is not about teaching yourself to feel less. It is about developing the kind of character that perceives rightly, cares about the right things, and acts from that double clarity. Which brings us to what is perhaps the most practically urgent question in Aristotle's entire account: how does that kind of character actually develop? Aristotle's answer to the question of how virtue is developed is stated plainly in Nicomachean Ethics 11:03a: we become just by doing just acts, temperate by doing temperate acts, and brave by doing brave acts. This formulation sounds almost circular at first, but its depth becomes apparent when you understand what he means by doing. He does not mean performing the outward behavior mechanically. He means performing the right action, in the right circumstances, with the right emotional response, for the right reasons, and doing so repeatedly, over time, until the correct pattern of perception, feeling, and choice becomes stable and reliable. That stable disposition is what he calls a hexis, a settled state of character, and it is not achieved by a single decision or a single act of will. This has a direct and uncomfortable implication for how we think about courage today. We tend to treat courage as something summoned in moments of crisis, a reserve of willpower drawn upon when the situation demands it. Aristotle would say this fundamentally misunderstands the nature of virtue. Courage is not a reserve. It is a disposition, a way of being oriented toward fear and danger that is built gradually through the accumulation of smaller acts, each one performed correctly. The person who has never practiced standing firm in difficult situations will not suddenly find genuine courage available to them when the stakes are highest. What they will find is the accumulated weight of their habits, for better or worse. The pedagogical consequence of this is that courage begins in the ordinary and the small. It begins in the daily confrontations with mild fear that most people deflect, avoid, or suppress, the difficult conversation deferred, the uncomfortable truth left unstated, the action avoided because it might invite criticism or loss. Each of those small deflections is a small habituation in the direction of cowardice. Each confrontation faced squarely, with an accurate perception of what is at stake and a genuine commitment to what is right, is a small habituation in the direction of the virtue. Over years, these accumulations become character, and character becomes the only thing that is actually available to you when you need it most. Aristotle's most practically applicable insight, then, is this: you do not prepare for the hard moments by imagining them. You prepare for them by how you live the ordinary ones, because in each ordinary moment, you are either practicing courage or practicing its opposite, and the difference between those two paths is not always visible until it is too late to change direction. Aristotle's account of courage in the Nicomachean Ethics is not an argument for fearlessness. It is an argument for a far more demanding ideal: the person who sees danger accurately, cares genuinely about what is worth protecting, and acts from that double clarity, not once, in a moment of crisis, but as the expression of a character built through years of deliberate practice. Fear, in this account, is not the enemy of courage. It is its necessary condition, because only a person who genuinely perceives what is at stake can genuinely choose to act in spite of it. To eliminate fear is not to become brave. It is to become blind. The practical implication is one you can act on today: pay attention to the small moments of avoidance, because they are not small. They are the material from which your character is being made, right now, whether you are attending to that process or not. Aristotle spent a lifetime studying what it means to live well. The least we can do is spend 10 minutes thinking about it. Subscribe if you want to keep thinking.